What if the person you underestimated held all the power you ever wanted? The marble steps leading to the Ashford estate gleamed under a cascade of golden light, each bulb carefully positioned to make the mansion look less like a home and more like a fortress of wealth. Black cars lined the circular driveway, their doors opening to release men in tailored tuxedos and women draped in silk that cost more than most people earned in a year. The air smelled of expensive perfume and older money, the kind that didn't need to announce itself because everyone already knew it was there. Tonight was the annual Convergence Gala, an event so exclusive that even billionaires had been turned away at the door. An invitation wasn't just a piece of cardstock. It was a declaration that you mattered. At the base of those gleaming steps stood Maya CEO, and she did not look like she mattered. Her coat was wool, not cashmere. Her shoes were clean but worn at the heels. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun, no stylist's hand involved, and her face carried no makeup beyond a touch of lip balm that had nearly worn off during the train ride over. She clutched a small leather bag against her side, the kind with a broken zipper that had been repaired with a safety pin. She didn't belong here. Everyone could see that. But she walked forward anyway. The doorman noticed her immediately. His eyes moved from her face to her coat to her shoes, a scan so quick and practiced it might as well have been mechanical. He stepped slightly to the left, a movement subtle enough to appear polite, but deliberate enough to block her path. Behind him, two security personnel in dark suits straightened, their hands drifting toward their earpieces. "Good evening," the doorman said, his voice smooth as glass and just as cold. "May I see your invitation?" Maya reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not cardstock. Paper. Printer paper, to be exact, with a slightly smudged inkjet logo at the top. She held it out. The doorman took it between two fingers as if it might be contaminated, unfolded it slowly and read. His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Confusion, maybe, or disbelief. "This isn't an official invitation," he said. "It's a summons," Maya replied quietly. "A summons." He repeated the word like it was foreign. "Ma'am, this is a private event, unless you have a legitimate invitation issued by the Ashford family or one of the corporate sponsors. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Maya didn't move. She stood there, small and still, while behind her a silver Bentley pulled up and a woman in a diamond necklace stepped out, laughing into her phone. The woman swept past without a glance, her perfume trailing like a wake. The doorman's jaw tightened. "Ma'am." "I'm here to see Charles Ashford," Maya said. The name hung in the air like a challenge. Charles Ashford, the host, the man whose face was on the cover of 3 different financial magazines this month alone. The doorman's expression shifted from irritation to something closer to alarm. "Mr. Ashford is not taking unsolicited meetings," he said, voice harder now. "If you don't leave immediately, I'll have security escort you off the property. Tell him Maya CEO is here." For a moment, no one moved. The doorman stared at her. The security guards exchanged glances. Somewhere inside the mansion, a string quartet began to play, the sound drifting through the open doors like smoke. Then the doorman turned, spoke quietly into his earpiece, and waited. His face was unreadable. 30 seconds passed. A minute. Then his earpiece crackled, and he went very still. When he turned back to Maya, his expression had changed completely. "Mr. Ashford will see you," he said and stepped aside. Maya walked up the steps. The security guards didn't stop her. The doorman didn't speak. She passed through the towering double doors and into a world that didn't make sense for someone like her to enter. The foyer was all white marble and gold trim, with a chandelier the size of a car hanging from a ceiling painted to look like the sky. People milled about in clusters, holding crystal glasses filled with champagne that cost more per bottle than her monthly rent. Their laughter was light, careless, the sound of people who had never worried about anything that mattered. No one looked at her. Or rather, they looked, registered that she didn't belong, and looked away as if she were invisible. A butler appeared at her side, older, with kind eyes. "This way, please." He led her through the crowd, down a hallway lined with portraits of stern-faced men in old-fashioned suits, and finally to a door at the end. He knocked once, opened it, and gestured for her to enter. Then he closed the door behind her, and she was alone. The room was an office, but not the kind regular people had. The desk was mahogany, the chairs were leather, and the walls were lined with bookshelves that reached the ceiling, filled with volumes that looked like they'd never been read. Behind the desk sat Charles Ashford. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 50, with silver at his temples and a face that had been handsome once, but was now simply commanding. He didn't stand when she entered. He didn't smile. He just looked at her, the way someone might look at a puzzle they couldn't quite solve. "Maya Sayo," he said. Not a question, a confirmation. "Mr. Ashford, I wasn't expecting you. I wasn't expecting to come." He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands across his stomach. "You realize this is a private event? You realize you just walked past some of the most powerful people in the city looking like—" He paused, searched for a word. "Exactly like someone who shouldn't be here." "I know. And yet you came anyway." He tilted his head slightly. "Why?" Maya set her bag on the edge of his desk. From it she pulled a single manila folder, slightly bent at the corners, and placed it in front of him. He glanced down at it but didn't open it. "What is this?" "The reason I'm here." "That's not an answer." "Open it." For a long moment he didn't move. Then slowly he reached forward and flipped the folder open. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. His expression didn't change, but his breathing did. Just slightly. Just enough. "Where did you get this?" His voice was quieter now. "Does it matter?" "It matters a great deal." Maya didn't answer. She just stood there, hands folded in front of her, waiting. Charles Ashford stared at the papers in front of him, and for the first time since she'd entered the room, he looked less like a man in control and more like a man who'd just realized he'd made a terrible mistake. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "I want what's mine." "And what exactly is that?" Maya smiled. It was a small smile, barely there, but it changed everything about her face. Suddenly she didn't look plain. She didn't look invisible. She looked like someone who'd been underestimated her entire life and had finally decided to stop allowing it. "Everything," she said softly. Outside, the gala continued. The music played. The champagne flowed. The powerful laughed and schemed and pretended the world belonged to them. But inside that office, something had shifted. The woman they'd turned away at the door wasn't leaving, and the man who'd built an empire on knowing exactly who mattered and who didn't was beginning to realize he'd gotten it very, very wrong. Charles Ashford closed the folder with a deliberate slowness, the kind that suggested he was buying time to think. His fingers remained on the manila surface, pressing down just enough to leave faint impressions. The silence in the room stretched thin, pulled taut like a wire about to snap. Outside, someone laughed, high and bright, the sound muffled by mahogany doors and centuries of inherited certainty. Inside, the air had grown dense with something neither of them had named yet. "You understand what you're asking for is impossible," Charles said finally. His voice carried the practiced calm of a man who'd negotiated billion-dollar deals before breakfast. But there was something underneath it now, a hairline fracture in the foundation. "Even if these documents are authentic, and I'm not saying they are, you can't simply walk into a room and demand restitution for something that happened 30 years ago." Maya didn't move. She stood with her hands still folded, her posture unchanged, but her eyes had sharpened. "You're right," she said. "I can't simply demand it. That's why I brought proof." "Proof of what, exactly?" "That my mother was more than a secretary in your father's company. That she was a partner. A silent partner, yes, but a partner nonetheless. That she contributed not just labor, but intellectual property, strategic frameworks, and the very foundation of what became Ashford Technologies. And that when your father forced her out, he didn't just take her position, he took her work, her innovations, and her future. And then he made sure no one would ever believe her if she spoke." Charles stood now, slowly, his chair rolling back with a soft whisper against the Persian rug. He walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back, and looked out at the Gala below. From this height, the guests looked like pieces on a chessboard, moving in predetermined patterns, unaware they were being watched. "My father built this company from nothing," he said, his voice quieter now, almost reflective. "He worked 18-hour days, mortgaged everything he had, risked his entire life to create something that would last. That's the story I grew up with. That's the story everyone knows." "It's also a lie," Maya said. "Or at least it's incomplete." He turned to face her. "Your mother worked for him. That's not in dispute. But working for someone doesn't entitle you to ownership. If she had a legitimate claim, she would have pursued it legally. She would have fought. She did fight." Maya's voice remained steady, but something had entered it now, something raw beneath the calm. "She fought for 3 years. She hired lawyers she couldn't afford. She presented documentation, testimony, everything she had. And every single time, your father's legal team buried her. They outspent her. They outlasted her. They made sure every door she knocked on was already locked. Do you know what happens to a woman with no money, no connections, and no powerful family name when she goes up against a man like your father? She doesn't lose in court. She loses before she ever gets there. She loses when her lawyers suddenly drop her case. She loses when her bank accounts are mysteriously frozen. She loses when her car breaks down and the mechanic charges triple because someone made a phone call. She loses in 1,000 small ways until she has nothing left but a daughter and a story no one will believe." Charles said nothing. His face had gone very still, the kind of stillness that suggested he was processing information he'd never considered before. Or perhaps information he'd deliberately avoided considering. He returned to his desk and sat down, not in the high-backed leather chair of authority, but in one of the smaller chairs opposite it, the ones meant for guests. It was a subtle shift, but Maya noticed it. She always noticed the small things. That's how people like her survived. "Why now?" he asked. "Your mother passed away, 4 years ago? Why wait until tonight, until the middle of my gala to show up with this?" "Because 4 years ago I was still trying to be invisible," Maya said. "I was still trying to survive in a world that taught me to stay small, stay quiet, and never ask for anything I couldn't earn through silence and endurance. I worked 3 jobs to pay for my mother's medical bills. I watched her die in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and defeat. And on her last day, she didn't talk about the company. She didn't talk about what your father took from her. She talked about me. She said, 'Don't be like me. Don't let them make you disappear.' So I'm not waiting anymore. I'm not being quiet anymore. And I'm not asking for permission to exist in spaces that were built, in part, by my mother's mind." Charles rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture that made him look older, more human, less like the untouchable figure on magazine covers. "Even if everything you're saying is true, and I'm still not conceding that it is, what exactly do you expect me to do? Announce to the world that my father was a thief? Destroy the legacy of a man who's been dead for 6 years? Split the company with someone who has no experience in this industry, no training, no network?" "I don't want the company," Maya said, and for the first time Charles looked genuinely surprised. "I want acknowledgement. I want my mother's name on the building she helped create. I want a foundation established in her honor, funded properly, focused on supporting women in technology who come from backgrounds like hers. And I want a seat at the table, not as a charity case, not as a token, but as someone who has every right to be there because of what my mother contributed and what I've earned in my own right. What you've earned? Charles leaned forward, his skepticism returning. Forgive me, but what exactly have you earned? I don't know you. I've never heard your name before tonight. Maya reached into her bag again and pulled out a thin tablet, older model, screen slightly cracked at the corner. She tapped it twice and turned it to face him. On the screen was a series of code, elegant and complex, flowing in structured lines that meant nothing to most people, but everything to those who understood. 3 years ago, Ashford Technologies nearly collapsed when your primary security infrastructure was breached. You lost $43 million in the initial attack and faced potential losses in the billions if the vulnerability wasn't patched immediately. Your entire team worked for 72 hours straight and couldn't solve it. Then, mysteriously, a solution appeared in your system, anonymous, untraceable. It not only fixed the breach but redesigned your entire security architecture in a way that made it virtually impenetrable. Your stock price recovered, your reputation was saved, and no one ever figured out where that solution came from. Charles stared at the screen. His face had gone pale. That was you? I was working as a night cleaner in your building at the time, Maya said. I had access to floors most people didn't pay attention to. I saw the panic. I heard the conversations. And I knew I could fix it because my mother taught me to code when I was 7 years old, in the evenings after she came home from being erased by your father. She taught me everything she never got credit for. Every algorithm, every framework, every innovative approach that your father claimed as his own. So yes, Mr. Ashford, I earned my seat at that table. I've been earning it my entire life while staying invisible because that's what women like my mother and I are taught to do. But I'm not invisible anymore. The room fell silent again. But it was a different kind of silence now. Not tense but heavy, weighted with recognition. Charles looked at the woman standing before him and seemed to be seeing her for the first time, not as an intruder or a problem to be managed, but as a person whose existence had always been there, just outside his carefully constructed field of vision. You saved my company, he said slowly. You could have asked for anything then. Money, recognition, a position. Why didn't you? Because I wasn't ready yet, Maya said. I was still afraid, still convinced that people like me don't get to ask for things like that. But fear is expensive, Mr. Ashford. It cost my mother everything, and I decided I can't afford it anymore. Charles stood and walked back to the window. The gala below continued its glittering performance, oblivious to the conversation happening above. He watched a woman in red descend the front steps, laughing at something a man in a grey suit had said. Watched the valet bring around a car that cost more than most houses. Watched the easy comfort of people who'd never had to fight for the right to be seen. When he turned back to Maya, his expression had changed. Not softened exactly, but opened. Like a door that had been locked for so long everyone forgot it could move. If I do this, he said carefully, and I'm not saying I will, but if I do, it won't be easy. There will be resistance. Board members, shareholders, people who built their careers on my father's legend. They'll fight you. They'll question everything. They'll make your life difficult in ways you can't imagine yet. I know, Maya said. I've been preparing for difficult my entire life. He studied her for a long moment, then reached for his phone. He typed something quickly, paused, then sent it. Less than a minute later, there was a knock at the door. The kind butler from earlier entered, carrying a silver tray with 2 glasses and a bottle of water, not champagne. Charles nodded his thanks, and the butler disappeared as quietly as he'd arrived. Charles poured water into both glasses and handed one to Maya. She took it, surprised by the gesture's simplicity. My father used to say that power isn't about having everything, Charles said. holding his glass but not drinking. It's about deciding who gets nothing. I grew up believing that. I built my career on it. But standing here now, looking at you, I'm starting to think he was wrong. Or maybe he was right. And that's exactly the problem. He set his glass down untouched. I need time to verify your documents. I need to consult with people I trust. I need to figure out how to do this without destroying everything in the process. But I'm not dismissing you, and I'm not pretending you don't exist. That's more than my father ever gave your mother, and I'd like to think I'm a better man than he was, though I'm not sure I've earned that distinction yet. Maya sipped her water. It was cold, clean, probably filtered through some system that cost more than her entire apartment. Time is acceptable, she said, but not silence. I want weekly updates. I want transparency. And I want a written agreement that this conversation happened and that you're taking my claims seriously. You don't trust me. I don't trust systems built to erase people like my mother, but I'm willing to believe you might be different. Prove it. Charles almost smiled. Almost. You're tougher than you look. I've had to be. He walked to his desk, pulled out a piece of letterhead, and began writing by hand. When he finished, he signed it, dated it, and handed it to Maya. It wasn't a legal document, just a simple acknowledgement of their conversation and his commitment to investigate her claims in good faith. But it was something. A beginning. Maya folded the paper carefully and placed it in her bag next to the folder that had started all of this. She looked at Charles Ashford, this man who held so much power and was only now beginning to understand how much of it was built on someone else's silence. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Her hand was on the handle when he spoke again. "Maya?" She paused but didn't turn around. "Why tonight? Really? Why walk into a room full of people who would never let you in and demand to be seen?" She looked back at him over her shoulder. Her face was calm, but her eyes held something fierce and unbreakable. "Because someone once told me that the only way to change who gets a seat at the table is to stop waiting for an invitation and build your own chair." She opened the door. "I'm done waiting." She walked out, leaving Charles Ashford alone in his office with a folder full of truths he'd never wanted to examine, and a growing suspicion that the world he'd inherited wasn't nearly as solid as he'd always believed. And somewhere in the hallway, Maya Seo walked past the portraits of powerful men who'd never imagined someone like her would one day matter, and she allowed herself, just for a moment, to smile. Maya walked through the hallway with the portraits staring down at her, their painted eyes following her movement like silent judges who'd already reached their verdict. The music from the gala grew louder as she approached the main foyer, violins weaving through the murmur of conversation, champagne glasses clinking in rhythmic punctuation. She should have felt triumphant. She'd done what she came to do. She'd been heard. But as she descended the grand staircase, her hand trailing along the cold marble balustrade, something else settled in her chest. Not satisfaction. Something heavier. Something that tasted like the beginning of doubt. At the bottom of the stairs, the butler who'd escorted her earlier appeared again, as if he'd been waiting. He didn't speak, just gestured toward a side door, away from the crowd. Maya hesitated, then followed. The door led to a smaller room, quieter, lined with bookshelves and furnished with chairs that looked like they'd been chosen for comfort rather than impression. A library, perhaps, or a reading room that no one at this party would bother to use. The butler closed the door behind her, and only then did Maya realize she wasn't alone. A woman sat in one of the chairs by the window, backlit by the glow of the garden lights outside. She was older, perhaps 70, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant knot, and a face that carried the kind of beauty that doesn't fade but transforms into something sharper, more knowing. She wore a dark blue dress, simple but clearly expensive, and her hands rested on the arms of the chair like a queen holding court. When she looked at Maya, her expression was unreadable. "Sit," the woman said. Not an invitation. A command delivered so naturally that Maya found herself obeying before she decided to. She took the chair opposite, setting her bag on the floor beside her. The woman studied her in silence for what felt like a full minute, and Maya forced herself not to look away, not to shrink under the scrutiny. "You have your mother's eyes," the woman said finally. "I wondered if you would. I only met her once, but I remember them clearly. Dark, intelligent, and far too trusting for the world she was trying to navigate." Maya's breath caught. "You knew my mother?" "Not well, but I knew of her. I was married to Richard Ashford for 32 years before he died. Which makes me, I suppose, the woman whose comfort was built on your mother's erasure." The words were delivered without emotion, but they hung in the air like an accusation turned inward. "My name is Eleanor. And before you ask, yes, Charles knows I'm here. I asked the staff to bring you to me before you left. I needed to speak with you. Alone." Maya's mind raced. Eleanor Ashford, the widow. The woman whose face appeared in charity galas and museum dedications, always smiling, always gracious, always perfectly positioned beside the men who made the decisions. Maya had never considered her as anything more than a decoration in the background of her mother's story. But sitting here now, looking into those sharp, knowing eyes, she realized that had been a mistake. "Why?" Maya asked. "Why did you need to speak with me?" Eleanor reached for a glass of water on the table beside her, took a small sip, and set it down with precision. "Because you're about to do something dangerous, and I don't think you fully understand what you're walking into. Charles is a good man, better than his father in many ways, but he's still a man who lives in a world where power is currency and truth is negotiable. You gave him documents, you told him a story, and he listened because you shocked him, because you had leverage he didn't expect, because you were smart enough to pick the exact right moment. But shock wears off, and when it does, the machinery of protection kicks in. Lawyers, investigators, public relations specialists, people whose entire job is to make problems disappear. "I'm not a problem," Maya said, but even as she spoke, she heard the uncertainty in her own voice. "No," Eleanor agreed, "you're worse. You're the truth, and truth is much harder to eliminate than problems." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze intensifying. "I want you to understand something. Your mother was right about everything. The work she did, the contributions she made, the way Richard stole her future and called it business. I knew. Not at first, but eventually. I found documents, overheard conversations, pieced together a picture I hadn't wanted to see. And I did nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, that marriage meant loyalty even when loyalty meant complicity. I convinced myself that whatever had happened was in the past, that speaking up would only cause pain without changing anything. I was wrong, and I've carried that wrongness for over 2 decades. Maya felt something crack open inside her chest. She'd spent so long focusing on Charles, on the company, on the visible face of the Ashford legacy, that she'd never considered the people in the shadows, the ones who'd seen and stayed silent. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you need to know what you're up against, and because I owe your mother more than silence." Eleanor's voice dropped lower, more urgent. "Charles will try to do the right thing, I believe that. But the board won't care about right. They'll care about precedent, liability, share prices, reputation. If they acknowledge what Richard did to your mother, they open the door to questions about what else he might have done, what other corners he might have cut, what other people he might have destroyed on his way to building an empire. And they won't allow that door to open. They'll fight you with everything they have. They'll dig into your life, your mother's life, looking for anything they can use to discredit you. They'll make you wish you'd stayed invisible. Then why shouldn't I just walk away? Maya heard herself ask, and hated the weakness in the question. Because walking away doesn't change anything. Eleanor stood now, moving to the window, her silhouette sharp against the light. I walked away from the truth for years, and all it did was make me complicit. You have a choice I didn't have. You have proof, leverage, and a son who's willing to listen, but you need to be smarter than your mother was. She fought with righteousness and expected justice. You need to fight with strategy and expect war. Maya stood too, her legs unsteady beneath her. What are you suggesting? Eleanor turned from the window, and in the shifting light, Maya saw something surprising in her face. Not sympathy. Respect. I'm suggesting you need allies. Real ones. People inside the system who understand how it works and know where the weak points are. I'm suggesting you document everything, every conversation, every promise, every slight. I'm suggesting you prepare for them to come after you in ways you haven't imagined yet. And I'm suggesting... She paused, seemed to weigh something internal, then continued. I'm suggesting that I would like to help you, not for absolution. I don't believe I deserve that. But because I spent too many years protecting a legacy that wasn't worth protecting. And I'd like to spend whatever time I have left doing something that actually matters. Maya stared at her. This woman, this stranger who'd lived in luxury built partially on her mother's stolen work, was offering to be an ally. It felt impossible. It felt like a trap. It felt like the first honest thing anyone connected to the Ashford family had ever offered her. Why would you risk your own position to help me? Because my position is meaningless, Eleanor said simply. I'm a widow with a trust fund and a name that opens doors I no longer care about walking through. I have nothing to lose except the weight of my own conscience, and frankly, I'm tired of carrying it. She moved closer to Maya, close enough that Maya could see the fine lines around her eyes, the evidence of years spent smiling at parties while carrying secrets. Your mother trusted the wrong people. She believed in systems that were designed to fail people like her. You don't have to make the same mistake. Let me be useful. Let me give you the things she never had. Access, information, understanding of how these people think and what they fear. And most importantly, let me be a witness who can't be dismissed or silenced, because I'm one of them. Maya's mind spun. She'd come here tonight with a plan, with documents and demands and a carefully rehearsed confrontation. She'd expected resistance, legal threats, maybe even security escorting her out. She hadn't expected Charles to listen. She certainly hadn't expected his stepmother to offer help. It was too much, too fast, and she felt the control she'd maintained so carefully beginning to slip. How do I know I can trust you? You don't, Eleanor said. Trust isn't something you know, it's something you choose, usually with incomplete information and too much at stake. But I'll tell you this. Tomorrow morning, Charles is going to call a meeting with the company's legal team. They're going to tell him that your claims are unprovable, that even if they weren't, the statute of limitations has passed, that acknowledging your mother's contributions would open the company to lawsuits and investigations they can't afford. They're going to pressure him to offer you money, a non-disclosure agreement and a quiet exit, and he's going to be tempted to take that advice because it's easier than fighting his own board. How do you know that? Because I've seen this dance before. Richard did it 3 times during our marriage with different people making different claims. The pattern is always the same. Listen sympathetically, promise investigation, then bury the problem under legal protection and financial settlements. The system protects itself. Eleanor walked to a small desk in the corner and wrote something on a piece of paper. She folded it and handed it to Maya. This is my private number, not the one that goes through assistants or gets screened by staff. If Charles wavers, if the board moves against you, if you need someone who knows where the bodies are buried because she helped dig some of the graves, you call me. Immediately. Don't wait. Don't try to handle it alone. Maya took the paper, her fingers numb. She unfolded it and saw not just a phone number but also a name written underneath it. Victoria Chen. Who is this? A lawyer. One of the best in the country. She doesn't advertise, doesn't take many cases, and she's very expensive. But she's also someone who wins against people like the Ashfords because she understands that power isn't just about money. It's about narrative. Call her. Tell her I sent you. She'll know what it means. Eleanor moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. Your mother must have been extraordinary to raise a daughter brave enough to walk into this house and demand justice. I wish I'd known her better. I wish I'd been brave enough to help her when it mattered. I can't change that. But I can try to make sure her daughter doesn't face the same machinery alone. She opened the door, and the sound of the party rushed in, a reminder that just beyond this quiet room, the world continued in its oblivious spin. Eleanor looked back once more. They're going to tell you that you're asking for too much, that you should be grateful for whatever scraps they're willing to throw. Don't believe them. You're not asking for anything that wasn't stolen first. Remember that when they try to make you feel small again, then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent decades navigating rooms full of people who never looked closely enough to see. Maya stood alone in the library, Eleanor's words echoing in her head, the paper with the phone number clutched in her hand. She'd come here expecting a battle, but standing here now, she realized she'd walked into something much more complex. Not a single fight, but a war with fronts she hadn't even identified yet. And for the first time since her mother's death, she felt the full weight of what she'd started. She left through the side door, avoiding the main entrance, and walked down a path that led around the side of the estate. The night air was cold against her face, sharp and clarifying. Behind her, the mansion glowed like a monument to certainty, to the idea that some people simply deserved more because they'd always had it. But Maya had learned something her mother never fully grasped. Monuments could be questioned, legacies could be rewritten, and sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was refuse to disappear. She pulled out her phone, stared at Eleanor's number for a long moment, then typed a different number from memory. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Maya, it's almost midnight. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Jenna, Maya said quietly. I just needed to hear a friendly voice. Are you busy tomorrow? I think I'm going to need help. The kind that doesn't come from lawyers or family names. The kind that comes from people who've actually fought for things that mattered. There was a pause, then a soft laugh. You did it, didn't you? You actually went. I went. And? Maya looked back at the mansion one last time, at all that light and certainty and inherited power, and felt something shift inside her. Not fear, not triumph, something else. Determination, maybe, or just the simple recognition that she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. And I think I just started something I don't know how to finish, but I'm not stopping, I can't. Good, Jenna said firmly. I'll be there tomorrow. We'll figure it out together, that's what we do. Maya ended the call and started walking toward the street where she'd parked her old car, the one that needed a new transmission and had a crack in the windshield she couldn't afford to fix yet. Halfway there, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She almost didn't check it, then changed her mind. The message was short, just 6 words, but they made her blood run cold. We know what you're attempting. Stop. No signature, no identification. Just a threat delivered cleanly, efficiently, like a surgical cut. Maya stood under a streetlight, reading the message again, and understood with perfect clarity that Eleanor had been right. The machinery was already moving. They'd let her walk out of that office, let her have her moment of perceived victory, But they'd been watching, calculating, preparing. She was no longer just a woman making a claim. She was a problem that needed solving. And somewhere in that realization, something unexpected happened. Instead of fear, Maya felt a sharp, bright surge of anger. They thought a text message would make her stop. They thought one anonymous threat would be enough to send her back into silence. They didn't know her at all. They didn't know what she'd survived, what she'd learned, what her mother had taught her about endurance and refusal, and the quiet power of simply refusing to be erased. She deleted the message, dropped her phone back in her bag, and continued walking. Behind her, the Ashford estate continued its glittering performance, unaware that the woman they'd dismissed at the door had just decided that fear was a luxury she could no longer afford. And in the morning, when the lawyers gathered and the board prepared their strategy, and Charles Ashford faced the pressure to make the problem disappear, they would all discover something they hadn't anticipated. Maya Co was done being invisible, and invisible women, once they decide to be seen, are far more dangerous than anyone ever expects. Maya didn't sleep that night. She sat at her small kitchen table in an apartment that smelled faintly of the curry her neighbor cooked every evening, staring at her laptop screen as the hours bled from midnight into the grey promise of dawn. The folder she'd shown Charles Ashford was only part of the story. There were other documents, other pieces of evidence her mother had collected over the years, hidden in boxes Maya had been afraid to open until now. Bank statements showing deposits that stopped abruptly the month her mother was forced out. Handwritten notes in her mother's careful script detailing meetings, ideas, frameworks that later appeared in Ashford Technologies patents under Richard Ashford's name alone. Emails printed on paper that had yellowed with time, their words still sharp as broken glass. But it was the last item Maya found, buried at the bottom of a cardboard box, labeled only with the year her mother died, that made her hands start to shake. A cassette tape. Actual magnetic tape in a plastic case, something so outdated Maya had to search through her closet for the old recorder her mother had kept, the one that still worked if you hit it just right. She plugged it in, inserted the tape, and pressed play. There was static first, then the sound of breathing. Then her mother's voice, younger than Maya, remembered it, stronger, filled with a determination that made Maya's chest ache. My name is Sunhee Seo. Today is March 14th, 1997. I'm recording this because I've tried every legal avenue available to me and been blocked at every turn. I've been told by 3 different lawyers that I don't have a case, not because I'm wrong, but because I can't afford to be right. So I'm creating a record. If something happens to me, if I can't finish this fight, I want my daughter to know what really happened. I want someone to know the truth, even if the truth never gets its day in court. Maya's finger hovered over the pause button but didn't press it. Her mother's voice continued, steady and precise, laying out details Maya had never heard before. How Richard Ashford had approached her with a partnership proposal, promising equal recognition and profit sharing in exchange for her expertise in security architecture. How she'd worked for 18 months, designing the systems that would become the foundation of the company's breakthrough product. How Richard had slowly begun excluding her from meetings, crediting her work to his own team, rewriting the narrative until she became just another employee rather than a partner. And then, the part that made Maya's blood run cold. He threatened Maya. Not directly, but clearly enough. He said that if I continued to pursue my claim, he would make sure no university would accept her, no scholarship program would consider her, that her future would be as limited as mine had become. He said he had the power to make that happen, and I believed him. So I stopped. I took the severance package he offered, signed the papers his lawyers put in front of me, and I walked away. Because I chose my daughter's future over my own justice. I'd make the same choice again, but I need her to know that walking away didn't mean I was wrong. It just meant I was a mother first. The tape clicked off. Maya sat in the silence that followed, tears streaming down her face in hot, angry tracks. All those years, she'd wondered why her mother hadn't fought harder, hadn't pushed back with the same fierce intelligence she'd brought to everything else. Now she knew. Her mother had fought. She'd just been fighting for something different, for someone different. The guilt was overwhelming, irrational, crushing. If she'd never been born, maybe her mother would have won. Maybe justice would have been possible. But that thought lasted only a moment before it was replaced by something else. Rage. Pure and clarifying. Richard Ashford hadn't just stolen her mother's work. He'd weaponized a mother's love, turned it into leverage, used it to silence someone who'd already been made voiceless by every system designed to keep people like her in their place. And then he'd built an empire on top of that silence, died wealthy and praised, left behind a legacy celebrated in business schools and memorial foundations. Maya looked at the clock. 5:47 in the morning. She picked up her phone and called the number Eleanor had given her for Victoria Chen. It rang 4 times before a crisp, alert voice answered, showing no sign that it was barely dawn. "This is Victoria. My name is Maya Seo. Eleanor Ashford told me to call you." There was a pause, not of confusion but of rapid calculation. "She said someone might call. I didn't expect it to be this soon. What happened?" Maya told her everything. The gala, the conversation with Charles, the meeting with Eleanor, the threatening text message, and finally, the tape. As she spoke, she heard the clicking of a keyboard on the other end. Victoria taking notes or researching or doing whatever lawyers did when they were 3 steps ahead of everyone else. When Maya finished, there was a long silence. "You still have the tape?" Victoria asked. "Yes. Don't tell anyone else about it. Not Charles, not Eleanor, not your closest friend. That tape is insurance leverage and possibly the most dangerous thing you currently possess. If they know you have a recording of your mother explicitly stating she was threatened, they'll do everything possible to discredit it, destroy it, or make sure it never sees a courtroom. What do I do with it? You make copies, multiple copies. You store them in different locations. Then you forget you have them unless absolutely necessary. Right now, your position is precarious but manageable. You made a claim, got attention, and backed it up with documentation. Charles is sympathetic, which is more than most people in your situation ever get. But if you come out swinging with accusations of threats and coercion, they'll paint you as unstable, vindictive, a daughter so desperate to believe her mother's story that you'd invent evidence to support it. We have to be smarter than that." Maya felt something inside her resist. "My mother was threatened. Doesn't that matter?" "It matters enormously, but we have to prove it in a way that can't be dismissed or explained away. And we have to choose the right moment. Trust me on this, Maya. I've spent 20 years watching good people with legitimate grievances get destroyed because they played their strongest card too early. We're going to win this, but we're going to do it strategically, not emotionally." "How long will that take?" "As long as it needs to. Justice isn't fast, but done correctly, it's permanent." Victoria's voice softened slightly. "Eleanor told me a little about your mother. She sounds like she was remarkable. This isn't just about recognition or money anymore, is it? It's about making sure what happened to her can't happen to someone else." "Yes," Maya said, surprised by how true it felt. "Yes, that's exactly what it's about." "Good. That's the kind of motivation that sustains you when things get difficult. And they will get difficult, Maya. Much more difficult than they are right now. Are you prepared for that?" Maya thought about her mother, working 3 jobs while teaching herself advanced coding in the evenings. Thought about the hospital bills and the small apartment, and the quiet dignity with which she'd faced a world determined to make her irrelevant. "I'm prepared," she said. "Tell me what to do." They talked for another 40 minutes, Victoria outlining a strategy that was careful, methodical, and frustratingly slow. Document everything. Keep copies of all communications. Don't engage with threats or provocations. Let Charles make the first move. Build a narrative that was undeniable, not because it was dramatic, but because it was thoroughly, meticulously true. By the time they hung up, the sun had risen fully, painting Maya's small kitchen in pale gold light that made everything look fragile and temporary. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jenna. Coming over at 10, bringing coffee and breakfast. Don't argue. Maya smiled despite everything. She showered, changed into clean clothes, and was organizing the documents on her table when her phone rang. Charles Ashford's name appeared on the screen. Her heart kicked against her ribs. She let it ring twice more while she steadied her breathing, then answered. Maya. His voice sounded strained, tired, like he hadn't slept either. We need to talk, not on the phone. Can you meet me somewhere? Where? There's a coffee shop on Morrison Street near the river, small place, usually quiet. Do you know it? I can find it. 1 hour. Come alone, please. He hesitated, then added, This is important, and it's not what you might think. He ended the call before she could respond. Maya stared at her phone, Victoria's warnings echoing in her head. Don't meet alone. Document everything. Be careful. But Charles had sounded different, not angry or defensive. Scared, maybe, or conflicted. She looked at the tape recorder on her table, at the stack of documents that represented her mother's stolen life, and made a decision. She would go, but she wouldn't go unprepared. She set up her phone to record audio, tested it twice to make sure it worked, then tucked it into her jacket pocket position to capture conversation. She took photos of every document on her table, uploaded them to a cloud storage account Victoria had recommended, one with encryption and redundancy. She wrote a quick email to Jenna explaining where she was going and when to expect her back, instructing her to call Victoria if Maya didn't check in by noon. Then she grabbed her bag, looked around her small apartment one last time, and left. The coffee shop was exactly as Charles had described. Small, tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner, the kind of place that survived on regulars rather than tourists. Maya arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table in the back corner where she could see the entrance. She ordered tea she didn't want and waited. Charles arrived exactly on time, dressed casually in jeans and a dark sweater, looking more like someone's troubled brother than the CEO of a major corporation. He saw her immediately, ordered something at the counter, then joined her at the table. Up close, she could see the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. Thank you for coming, he said. You said it was important. It is. He glanced around the nearly empty shop, then leaned forward, lowering his voice. I had the meeting with my legal team this morning. Actually, it started at 6 and just finished half an hour ago. It went exactly how Eleanor predicted it would. They advised me to offer you a settlement, a substantial one, in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement and a complete release of all claims against the company and my father's estate. They have the paperwork already prepared. They want this handled quickly and quietly. Maya's chest tightened. And what did you tell them? I told them I wanted time to review the documents you provided more thoroughly, that I wasn't making any decisions until I'd verified the facts independently. They didn't like that answer. The board is calling an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. They're going to pressure me to resolve this immediately before it becomes a public relations problem. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that made him look younger, more vulnerable. Maya, I need you to understand something. I want to do right by you and your mother. I genuinely do. But I'm one person against an entire infrastructure designed to protect itself. If I push too hard, they'll remove me. They have the power to do that, and they will if they think I'm jeopardizing the company. So you're saying you're going to take their advice? Maya kept her voice level, but something was cracking inside her carefully maintained composure. I'm saying I need more time, and they're not going to give it to me, which is why I'm here. I need to know what you really want, not the official answer about recognition and foundations. What do you actually want from all of this? Maya looked at him. This man caught between inherited guilt and institutional pressure, and realized he was asking an honest question. Maybe the most honest question anyone from his world had ever asked her. I want people to know my mother existed, she said quietly. I want her name somewhere permanent, somewhere it can't be erased again. I want young women who look like her, who come from backgrounds like hers, to see that name and know that someone like them contributed something meaningful to the world. And I want to make sure what your father did to her can't be done to anyone else. That's what I want. Is that too much? Charles looked down at his untouched coffee. No, he said, it's not too much, it's the bare minimum of justice. But I don't know if I can give it to you. Not because I don't want to, but because the system I'm part of might not let me. Then help me find another way. Maya leaned forward, urgent now. You have access, information, understanding of how all this works. If you can't change it from inside, help me pressure it from outside. Be honest about what they're doing, what they're planning. Don't be complicit in your father's legacy just because walking away is hard. Charles met her eyes, and for a moment, Maya saw something break open in his expression, a decision being made in real time. They're going to leak a story, he said, the words coming fast now, like a confession that couldn't be held back any longer. Tomorrow, if I don't agree to their terms. They have contacts at major business publications. They're going to frame you as someone making false claims for money, trying to extort the company by exploiting my father's death and fabricating evidence. They've already started building a counter-narrative. They found out about the jobs you've worked, the financial struggles, and they're going to use all of it to paint you as desperate and opportunistic. Maya felt the air leave her lungs. They're going to destroy my credibility before I even get a chance to prove my case. Yes, unless we move first. We? Charles pulled out his phone, opened a folder, and turned it toward her. On the screen was a series of documents, internal company memos, financial records, correspondence between his father and various board members. I spent last night accessing files I wasn't supposed to see. My father kept everything, every shady deal, every corner he cut, every person he silenced. It's all there, including extensive documentation about your mother. He knew what he was doing. He knew it was wrong, and he documented it anyway because he never thought anyone would challenge him. Charles's voice was shaking now. If we release this, all of it, together, we control the narrative. We make it impossible for them to paint you as a liar because the proof comes from inside the company, validated by me. But Maya, if we do this, there's no going back. They'll come after both of us. They'll try to destroy everything I've built, everything my family name still means. And they'll come after you twice as hard because you'll have betrayed the settlement they were offering. Maya stared at the phone, at the evidence that could change everything, and felt the weight of the decision crushing down on her shoulders. This was the moment. The point where she had to choose between safety and truth, between the quiet settlement that would give her money but keep her mother's name buried, and the public fight that might vindicate her mother but could cost Maya everything she had left. She thought about the tape recording at home, her mother's voice saying she'd chosen her daughter's future over her own justice. She thought about Eleanor's warning that the system would protect itself. She thought about Victoria's careful strategy, and Jenna's unwavering support, and all the invisible women throughout history who'd been erased because staying quiet was safer than screaming into a void that wouldn't listen. And then she thought about that text message. We know what you're attempting. Stop. The casual threat, the assumption that fear would be enough. The arrogance of people who'd never had to fight for anything, believing that everyone else would surrender at the first sign of difficulty. Maya looked up at Charles, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. Send me everything you have. I'll get it to my lawyer, And then we're going to tell the truth, all of it, and let them try to stop us." Charles nodded slowly, something like relief crossing his face. "You're sure? Because once we start this—" "I'm sure." He began forwarding files to her email, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. Maya watched the notifications pile up on her phone, each one another piece of evidence, another crack in the carefully constructed wall of lies. When he finished, he looked at her with an expression that was part fear, part determination, part something she couldn't quite name. "My father's legacy is going to be destroyed by this," he said. "Everything people believed about him, about how he built this company, it's all going to come apart." "Good," Maya said. "Maybe that means we can finally build something honest in its place." They sat there for another moment, two people who should have been enemies united by the simple radical act of choosing truth over comfort. And Maya felt something shift in the air around them. Not victory, not yet, but possibility. The storm was coming. The machinery was already moving against them, but they were moving too, finally together, and sometimes that was enough. Charles stood to leave, then paused. "Your mother would be proud of you." Maya didn't trust herself to speak, so she just nodded. He walked out into the morning light, and Maya sat alone with her cooling tea and her phone full of evidence, and the certain knowledge that by tomorrow, everything would be different. She checked the recording app, made sure it had captured everything, then sent a message to Victoria. "We need to talk, now. Everything just changed." The reply came back within seconds. "I'm ready. Let's end this the right way." Maya gathered her things and walked out into a world that didn't know yet that it was about to be forced to see what it had spent decades pretending didn't exist. And somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the fear and the anger and the exhaustion, she felt her mother's presence, quiet and steady, like a hand on her shoulder guiding her forward into whatever came next. Ordered on ruthless. Not at the Ashford Technologies headquarters, where the board could control the environment and the message. Not at some anonymous hotel conference room that could be dismissed as desperate theater. Instead, she'd chosen the public library downtown, the same library where Maya's mother had spent countless evenings teaching herself the skills that would later be stolen from her. The symbolism was intentional, unavoidable, perfect. Maya arrived an hour early. The room was already filling with reporters, their cameras setting up in rows that looked like an army preparing for battle. Victoria met her at the entrance, dressed in a charcoal suit that suggested authority without theatrics, her expression calm, but her eyes sharp as surgical steel. "Charles is already here. He's in the back room reviewing his statement. The board tried to block him from coming. They threatened legal action, removal, complete destruction of his position. He came anyway." "Is Eleanor here?" Maya asked. "She is, and she brought something you need to see." Victoria led Maya through a side door into a smaller room where Eleanor sat with Charles, and between them on the table was a box. Not cardboard, like the one Maya's mother had left. Mahogany, polished, expensive, with brass hinges that caught the light. Eleanor looked up as they entered, and Maya saw something in her face she hadn't seen before. Not guilt, not sympathy. Something fiercer. Resolution. "I spent last night going through Richard's private study," Eleanor said without preamble. "The one he kept locked even from me. After he died, I couldn't bring myself to enter it. I told myself it was grief, but really it was cowardice. I didn't want to know what I'd find. But after our conversation, Maya, I realized cowardice had already cost too much. So I went in, and I found this." She opened the box. Inside were notebooks, dozens of them, filled with Richard Ashford's handwriting. Ledgers of payments made to silence people. Names of lawyers instructed to bury cases. Detailed accounts of exactly how he'd built his empire, and every corner he'd cut doing it. Your mother wasn't the only one. There were others. 6 others over the years. All of them brilliant, all of them marginalized in ways that made them vulnerable. All of them erased from the story because it was easier to take credit than share it. Maya's hands shook as she reached for one of the notebooks. She opened it randomly and saw her mother's name, Sun-hee Seo, followed by dates, meeting notes, and then, in Richard's careless scrawl, a single sentence that made bile rise in Maya's throat. Threat regarding daughter's future effective. Subject will not pursue further action. Matter closed. Charles made a sound like he'd been punched. He stood abruptly, walked to the window, pressed his forehead against the glass. He wrote it down. He was proud of it. He documented his own cruelty like it was just another business transaction. He never thought he'd be held accountable, Eleanor said quietly. Men like Richard rarely do. They mistake getting away with something for being right about it. She looked at Maya directly. I'm testifying today, alongside you. I'm going to tell them everything I knew and everything I chose not to see. I'm going to destroy my own comfortable position because it turns out comfort built on other people's suffering isn't comfort at all. It's just cowardice with better furniture. Victoria checked her watch. We have 20 minutes. Maya, are you ready? Maya looked at the notebooks, at the evidence of her mother's erasure documented in the handwriting of the man who'd done it. She thought about the tape at home, her mother's voice saying she'd chosen her daughter over justice. She thought about all the women before her mother and all the women who'd come after. All of them told in 1,000 subtle ways that their contributions were secondary, their voices were too loud, their presence was negotiable. She thought about the text message threatening her to stop and how that threat had assumed she was someone who could be stopped. I'm ready, she said. And she was. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because fear had stopped being a good enough reason to stay silent. They walked into the conference room together. 4 people who shouldn't have been allies, united by the fragile, radical notion that truth mattered more than reputation. The room fell silent as they took their positions at the front table. Maya scanned the crowd and saw faces she recognized from business news, from technology publications, from the society pages where Eleanor had once smiled graciously beside her husband. In the back row, she spotted Jenna, who'd apparently decided that supporting a friend meant showing up even when explicitly told to stay home. Their eyes met, and Jenna nodded once, a gesture of solidarity that steadied Maya more than any words could have. Victoria spoke first, her voice clear and unemotional, laying out the facts with the precision of someone who'd spent years learning exactly how to make truth undeniable. She talked about Sun-hee Seo's contributions to Ashford Technologies, about the partnership agreement that was never honored, about the systematic erasure of her work and the threats used to ensure her silence. She presented documents, dates, corroborating evidence from the notebooks Eleanor had provided. She built a case not with passion but with facts, each one placed carefully on top of the last until the structure was unshakable. Then Charles spoke. His voice was rough, unsteady at first, then gaining strength as he went. He talked about discovering the truth about his father, about the uncomfortable reckoning of learning that the legacy you'd inherited was built partially on theft and cruelty, about choosing to be better than the man whose name you carried, even when it meant losing everything that name had given you. My father was brilliant, he said, but brilliance doesn't excuse cruelty, and success built on someone else's silenced voice isn't success. It's just theft with better public relations. I'm here today to say that I'm done protecting a legacy that doesn't deserve protection. And I'm here to support Maya Seo in her effort to reclaim what was stolen from her mother and to ensure this kind of erasure can't happen to anyone else. Eleanor went next. She was brief, devastating in her brevity. I was married to Richard Ashford for over 3 decades. I benefited from his success. I lived in comfort purchased by his ambition, and I knew, or at least suspected, that some of that success came at the cost of people who couldn't fight back. I did nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, that marriage meant loyalty, that speaking up would only cause pain without solving anything. I was wrong, and I've spent the last 6 years living with the weight of that wrongness. I'm here today to say that silence is complicity, and I'm done being complicit. Then it was Maya's turn. She stood, her legs somehow steady beneath her, and looked out at the sea of faces and cameras and the machinery of public attention that could either validate her mother's story or bury it under skepticism and noise. She thought about all the careful words Victoria had helped her prepare, the measured statements designed to be legally defensible and emotionally compelling, and then she set those words aside and spoke from somewhere deeper. My name is Maya Seo. My mother was Sunhee Seo. She immigrated to this country with nothing but intelligence, determination, and a belief that merit mattered more than connections. She was wrong about that last part, but she never stopped believing it anyway. She worked with Richard Ashford to build the security architecture that became the foundation of Ashford Technologies. She was promised partnership and given erasure. When she tried to fight back, she was threatened through me, her daughter. She was told that if she continued to pursue justice, my future would be destroyed. So she stopped. Because she was a mother, and mothers make sacrifices that break them in ways no one sees. She died 4 years ago in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and defeat. She died believing that what had been done to her was just the way the world worked for people like us. And maybe she was right. Maybe the world does work that way. But I'm here today to say that it shouldn't, that we can choose to be better than that. That truth doesn't expire just because it's inconvenient, and justice delayed isn't the same as justice denied unless we let it be. Maya's voice broke slightly, but she didn't stop. I didn't come here for money. I didn't come here for revenge. I came here because my mother deserved to be remembered as more than a footnote in someone else's success story. She deserved recognition. She deserved acknowledgement. She deserved the simple dignity of having her work credited to her name. And if speaking that truth makes me difficult or demanding or ungrateful for the settlement they were willing to offer me to stay quiet, then I accept those labels. Because staying quiet didn't protect my mother. It just made her invisible. And I refuse to be invisible anymore. I refuse to let her be forgotten. And I refuse to accept a world where brilliant women are systematically erased because it's easier to take credit than share it. The room was completely silent. Not the silence of indifference, but the silence of breath being held, of people recognizing they were witnessing something shift in real time. Maya looked directly into the nearest camera. This isn't just about my mother. This is about every person who's ever had their work stolen, their voice silenced, their contributions dismissed, because they didn't have the right connections or the right last name or the right amount of power to make people listen. This is about saying that matters, that they mattered, that the truth matters even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient. She sat down. For a moment, no one moved. Then the questions started, rapid fire, overlapping, reporters sensing they were documenting something significant. Victoria fielded most of them with practiced efficiency, but occasionally she'd direct one to Maya, and Maya would answer with a steadiness she hadn't known she possessed. Yes, she had documentation. Yes, she was prepared to pursue this legally if necessary. No, she hadn't been offered a settlement. Well, yes, technically she had, but it came with conditions that would have required her to deny the truth, and that wasn't acceptable. Halfway through, a man in the third row stood up. Maya recognized him immediately. David Park, Senior Vice President of Ashford Technologies, board member. One of the people who'd undoubtedly been in that morning meeting, advising Charles to make this problem disappear. His face was red, his jaw tight. "This is a publicity stunt," he said, not phrasing it as a question. "You're trying to extort money from a company by slandering a dead man who can't defend himself. You have no proof of partnership, No contract, just a collection of documents that could be interpreted any number of ways, and the word of a woman who clearly has a financial interest in this narrative. Victoria started to respond, but Maya held up a hand. She stood again, pulled out her phone, and connected it to the presentation system Victoria had set up. "I wasn't going to play this," she said. "My lawyer advised against it, but I think it's important that you hear my mother's voice, not filtered through my memory or interpretation, her actual voice from 1997, explaining exactly what happened to her and why she stopped fighting." She pressed play. The audio was scratchy, imperfect, but her mother's voice filled the room with startling clarity. The reporters went still. Cameras swiveled to capture reactions. And as Sun Hee Seo spoke, calmly and precisely detailing the partnership that was promised, the work that was taken, and the threat that silenced her, Maya watched David Park's face drain of color. She watched other board members in the audience exchange glances. She watched the narrative they'd tried to build crumble in real time under the weight of a voice that refused to stay buried. When the tape ended, the silence was different, heavier, charged with recognition that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Victoria stood. That recording was made by Sun Hee Seo 28 years ago. It corroborates everything we've presented today. It demonstrates clear intent on Richard Ashford's part to silence a legitimate business partner through threats against her daughter. And it proves that Maya Seo isn't inventing this narrative for financial gain. She's simply giving voice to a story her mother documented but couldn't tell herself. David Park sat down heavily. He didn't try to ask another question. The press conference continued for another 30 minutes, but the outcome was already determined. The story was out. The truth was public, and no amount of spin or corporate messaging could put it back in the box. Afterward, in the quiet room away from cameras, the four of them sat in exhausted silence. Charles's phone had been buzzing continuously, messages from board members, lawyers, colleagues, each one undoubtedly more threatening than the last. He'd stopped checking it after the first dozen. Eleanor sat with her hands folded, looking somehow lighter despite having just publicly dismantled her own comfortable life. Victoria was already on her laptop, monitoring the coverage as it spread across news sites and social media, the story multiplying and evolving as people shared it, discussed it, added their own experiences to the growing chorus of recognition. Maya's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, then changed her mind. "Hello? Ms. Seo, this is Margaret Liu from the Ashford Technologies Board of Directors." The voice was professional, careful. "We'd like to arrange a meeting, tomorrow morning, to discuss a path forward that addresses your concerns and honors your mother's contributions in a meaningful way." Maya looked at Victoria, who'd clearly been listening. Victoria nodded once. "I'll be there," Maya said, "with my legal counsel. Of course, 10 o'clock, our offices. And Ms. Seo." The woman paused. "For what it's worth, some of us have been waiting for this conversation for a very long time." The call ended. Maya set down her phone and looked at the three people who'd stood beside her when standing alone would have been impossible. "It's not over," she said. "No," Victoria agreed, "but it started, really started. And that's more than most people ever get." Charles leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "My father's name is going to be synonymous with theft and cruelty by tomorrow morning. Everything he built, everything I inherited, it's all tainted now." "Good," Eleanor said firmly. "Maybe that means you can build something better, something honest, something that doesn't require anyone else to be erased." Maya felt tears starting. Finally, the emotional dam breaking now that the immediate crisis had passed. Jenna appeared in the doorway, crossed the room without asking permission, and wrapped her arms around Maya in a hug that felt like the first safe thing Maya had experienced in days. "You did it," Jenna whispered. "Your mom would be so proud." And Maya, standing in that quiet room with the sound of her own breathing and the weight of what she'd just set in motion, allowed herself to believe that might actually be true. The fight wasn't finished. There would be more meetings, more negotiations, more moments where powerful people tried to minimize what had happened and control the narrative. But the silence was broken. The erasure was reversed. And somewhere in the space between what had been lost and what might be reclaimed, Maya felt her mother's presence, not as absence but as legacy, not as defeat, but as the foundation for something that would outlast them both. The evening news led with the story. By midnight, it was trending on every platform. And in the morning, when Maya walked into that boardroom with Victoria beside her, she walked as someone who'd already won the only victory that mattered. She'd made her mother visible again, and no one could ever take that away. The boardroom at Ashford Technologies looked different in the morning light, less imposing somehow. The polished table still stretched like an expanse of dark water, and the leather chairs still spoke of money and power. But the people sitting in them looked smaller than Maya had imagined. Tired, human, caught between the reputation they'd spent decades building and the truth that had just shattered it into pieces too small to reassemble. Margaret Liu sat at the head of the table, flanked by attorneys and board members whose names Maya recognized from the press coverage that had exploded overnight. Charles was there too, positioned deliberately on Maya's side of the table rather than theirs. A statement without words. Margaret spoke first, her voice carrying none of the corporate smoothness Maya had expected. Ms. CEO, I want to begin by saying something that should have been said 28 years ago. We're sorry. The board is sorry, the company is sorry. What was done to your mother was unconscionable, and the fact that it was allowed to happen, that it was covered up, that it was defended for so long, reflects a failure of integrity that we can't undo but must acknowledge. She paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. We've spent the last 12 hours in emergency sessions. Legal counsel advised us to fight this, to minimize, to protect the company's interests at all costs. We're not taking that advice. Instead, we're here to ask what would constitute meaningful recognition of your mother's contributions and meaningful change to ensure this can never happen again. Maya looked at Victoria, who gave a slight nod. They'd prepared for combat. This felt like something different. Not surrender exactly, but recognition that some fights shouldn't be won. They should be resolved. My mother's name, Maya said. On the building, not a small plaque that people walk past without noticing. Her name alongside Richard Ashford's on the company headquarters, acknowledging her as a founding contributor. A foundation in her honor, funded with real resources, dedicated to supporting women and underrepresented technologists. Not a tax write-off, something that matters, and a full public acknowledgement in writing of exactly what happened to her and why it was wrong. Done, Margaret said without hesitation. All of it. We'll work with you and your counsel on the specifics, but those terms are acceptable. She glanced at the lawyers beside her, who looked like they wanted to object, but had been overruled before this meeting even started. There's something else. We want to offer you a position with the company, not a token role, a real position with real authority, head of ethical oversight and accountability. You'd have the power to review company practices, investigate concerns, and implement changes to ensure we're living up to the values we should have had all along. Maya hadn't expected that. She felt Victoria tense slightly beside her, saw Charles' eyebrows rise in surprise. Why would you offer me that? Because you're the only person who's proven they're willing to hold us accountable, even when it's difficult, Margaret said. Because you understand in a way we clearly didn't, what it means when power goes unchecked. And because I think your mother would want her daughter to be part of building something better from the wreckage of what was broken. Maya thought about it. About walking into this building every day, seeing her mother's name on the outside, working in the same spaces where she'd once been erased. About having the power to ensure other people didn't face what her mother had faced. It should have felt like victory, and part of it did. But another part felt complicated, heavy with questions that didn't have simple answers. "I need time," she said, "to think about it, to decide if that's what I want." "Of course. Take whatever time you need. The offer stands." Margaret slid a folder across the table. "This contains everything we're proposing. The acknowledgement, the foundation details, the job offer, all of it in writing. Look it over with your attorney. Tell us what we've missed or gotten wrong. We want to do this right." The meeting lasted another hour, working through details and timelines and the logistics of how to publicly correct a lie that had been told for nearly 3 decades. When it ended, Maya walked out with Victoria and Charles into a day that looked ordinary. People going about their business, unaware that something fundamental had shifted in the building behind them. They stood on the sidewalk, the 3 of them, not quite sure what came next now that the war they'd prepared for had turned into something more complex and harder to categorize. "What are you going to do?" Charles asked. "About the job offer?" "I don't know," Maya said honestly. "Part of me wants to take it, to finish what my mother started. But another part wonders if accepting their offer means being absorbed into the same system that failed her. If you become part of the machine, can you really change it? Or does it just change you?" Victoria, who'd been quiet since leaving the boardroom, spoke up. "Those are good questions, and I don't think there are right answers, only choices. But I'll tell you what I've learned representing people in your position. Justice doesn't look the way we expect it to. It's not cinematic, it's not complete, it's messy and complicated and often unsatisfying in ways we weren't prepared for. But that doesn't make it less important, it just makes it human." Charles nodded slowly. "I'm stepping down as CEO. Announced it to the board this morning before you arrived. I can't lead a company while everyone's questioning whether I earned the position or just inherited it. I need to figure out who I am separate from my father's legacy. That's going to take time, probably years, and it's going to be uncomfortable and maybe impossible. But I'd rather fail trying to be someone honest than succeed at being someone I'm not." Maya looked at him with newfound respect. "That takes courage." "No," Charles said. "What you did takes courage. This is just consequence. I'm finally dealing with reality instead of the comfortable fiction I was raised to believe. That's not courage. That's just long overdue honesty." They parted ways there on the sidewalk, each returning to lives that had been irrevocably changed by a single decision to tell the truth when staying quiet would have been easier. Maya took the train home, the folder from Margaret Liu in her bag, her mother's voice still echoing in her head from that recording that had changed everything. She thought about all the years her mother had carried that silence, the weight of knowing what had been done to her, but being unable to speak it without destroying her daughter's future. She thought about the choice her mother had made, sacrificing her own justice for Maya's possibilities, and she thought about whether accepting that sacrifice meant honoring it or perpetuating the same system that had made it necessary in the first place. When she got home, Jenna was waiting on her doorstep with takeout containers and that particular expression that meant she wasn't leaving until they'd talked through everything. They ate on Maya's small balcony that overlooked a parking lot and a slice of sky, and Maya told her everything. About the meeting, the offer, the apology that felt simultaneously too much and not enough. About the strange hollow feeling of getting what you fought for and realizing it didn't fix the absence at the center of everything. "Your mom didn't fight for a job offer or a foundation," Jenna said quietly. "She fought for recognition, for the truth to be known. You got that. Everything else is just details you get to decide for yourself, not things you owe to her memory. But what if I make the wrong choice? Then you make another choice after that. That's how it works. Your mother didn't have the luxury of choices, not real ones. But she gave you that luxury by staying silent when speaking up would have destroyed you. The least you can do is use that gift she gave you, even if using it means going in a direction she never imagined. Maya sat with that for a long time, watching the sky shift from afternoon blue to evening gold. She thought about the woman who'd raised her, teaching her to code in the evenings while working multiple jobs, never complaining, never explaining why she never pursued the career she was clearly brilliant enough to have. She thought about the tape recording, her mother's voice saying she'd make the same choice again, choosing Maya's future over her own justice. And she thought about what it meant to truly honor that choice. Not by trying to retroactively fix what couldn't be fixed, but by living the kind of life her mother had made possible. 3 weeks later, Maya stood in front of Ashford Technologies headquarters. The sign was different now. Sunhee CO's name had been added, not small, not secondary, but equal to Richard Ashford's, acknowledging what had always been true but never been visible. Workers passed by on their way in and out, some pausing to read the new name, some texting photos to friends, the story spreading in ripples that would eventually fade, but never completely disappear. Eleanor stood beside Maya, neither of them speaking, just witnessing the physical manifestation of truth that had taken decades to claim its rightful place. I turned down the job, Maya said finally. The oversight position. I told them I'd consult, help them build the systems they need, but I'm not becoming part of the structure. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I need to build something of my own first. Something that exists outside of systems that failed people like my mother. Something that doesn't require anyone's permission to exist. Eleanor smiled. What will you build? I'm not sure yet. Maybe a consulting firm that helps other people who've had their work stolen. Maybe a non-profit that documents stories like my mother's before they're lost. Maybe just a life where I get to be visible on my own terms, instead of fighting to be seen in spaces that were designed to exclude me. I haven't figured it out yet, but I think that's okay. I think my mother would understand that justice isn't a destination, it's a direction. And as long as I'm moving towards something honest, something that matters, I'm honoring what she gave me. They stood there for a while longer. Two women looking at a name that represented so much more than letters on a building. It represented refusal, persistence, the simple radical act of insisting that truth matters even when acknowledging it is expensive and uncomfortable and threatens the stories people have built their identities around. Eventually, Eleanor said goodbye, mentioned something about a meeting with the foundation board they were establishing, and disappeared into the building that had once been synonymous with her husband's name and was now becoming something more complicated and honest. Maya walked to her mother's grave for the first time since the press conference. She'd avoided it, not sure what to say. Not sure if the victory she'd won would feel like enough when standing in front of the stone that marked where her mother rested. The cemetery was quiet. Afternoon sun filtering through trees that were just beginning to show their autumn colors. Maya sat on the grass beside the grave, pulled out her phone, and played the news coverage from the past few weeks. Stories about her mother's contributions. Interviews with other technologists talking about how common this kind of erasure was. Discussions about changing corporate culture and accountability, and the invisible labor that built empires while being systematically uncredited. I don't know if you would have wanted this, Maya said quietly to the stone. All this attention, all this scrutiny. You always preferred staying quiet, staying safe. But I couldn't do it, Mom. I couldn't let you stay invisible. I couldn't let them pretend you didn't matter. So I made noise. I made it impossible to ignore. And I think, maybe, that's what you would have wanted me to do even if you couldn't do it yourself. You gave me the courage to fight by showing me what happens when fighting isn't safe. And now I'm using that gift the only way I know how, by refusing to be erased, by making sure your name is remembered, by building something honest from the ruins of what was broken. She sat there until the sun began to set. talking to her mother about the job she'd turned down and the uncertainty ahead and the strange feeling of achieving something impossible and discovering that impossibility was just the beginning. She talked about Eleanor's guilt and Charles's reckoning and Victoria's strategic brilliance and Jenna's unwavering support. She talked about the threatening text message that had tried to make her stop and how that threat had become fuel instead of fear. She talked about everything except the question she couldn't answer, the one that kept her awake at night even after the victory was won. What if justice, even when achieved, can't heal the absence it was fighting for? What if winning doesn't bring back what was lost, doesn't undo the years of silence and struggle and slow erasure? What if the best we can do is acknowledge the debt we can never fully repay and try to build something better for the people coming after? Maya didn't have answers, but sitting there in the fading light with her mother's name carved in stone and her mother's name now visible on a building miles away, she thought maybe the questions were enough. Maybe the important thing wasn't resolution but recognition, not closure but continuity, not fixing the past but refusing to repeat it. She stood finally, brushed grass from her jeans, and took one last look at the grave. I'm going to keep going, Mom. I'm going to keep making noise. I'm going to keep refusing to be invisible. And I'm going to make sure other people don't have to fight the way you did, alone and unheard and systematically dismissed. I don't know if that's enough. I don't know if anything could be. But it's what I have to give. And I'm going to give it fiercely and without apology, the way you taught me to live, even when you couldn't live that way yourself. She walked back to her car as the sky deepened to purple, the first stars becoming visible overhead. Behind her, her mother rested beneath stone and earth. Ahead of her, her mother's name stood illuminated on a building that would outlast them both. And between those 2 points, past and future, Maya carried the story forward into whatever came next. Because some legacies are built with permission, and others are claimed despite every obstacle designed to prevent them. And the most powerful act of all might be simply refusing to let truth die just because speaking it is dangerous and inconvenient and threatens the comfortable stories people tell themselves about how the world works. The woman who'd been denied entry to a gala had turned the tables not through revenge or destruction, but through something quieter and more lasting. She'd made the invisible visible. She'd given voice to silence. She'd proven that the person you underestimate might be the one carrying the story that changes everything. And in doing so, she'd answered the question posed at the beginning, the one that seemed impossible when first asked. What if the person you underestimated held all the power you ever wanted? The answer, it turned out, was simple and profound. Then they'd use that power not to replicate the systems that excluded them, but to build something better. Something honest. Something that made space for all the brilliant invisible people who'd been erased before and refused to let it happen again. And that, perhaps, was the only victory that truly mattered.